Hi, this is Paul. I don't know how many videos I'm going to get out next week because I'm traveling back to Massachusetts to be with the family. And obviously, with my sister's death, my schedule in December is kind of crazy. So a lot of the opportunities for conversations were canceled in November, obviously, and there's probably not going to be a lot of time in December for a lot of conversations. For those of you who are kind of waiting in the queue to have a conversation with me, well, it's probably going to get pushed into January and February. So we'll just see how that goes. And it's also obviously disrupted the flow of making videos. I don't know if I'll make any videos next week being out of town. We'll see. But there are a lot of good things right now to watch. Rebel Wisdom is really doing a lot of fun stuff. And there are a couple videos with Bret Weinstein out right now that I thought were really good, and I very much enjoyed them. There's a lot there to chew on. Jonathan Peugeot released his November question and answer, and I thought that was a great one. It was like an hour and a half, and he apologizes at the end for being kind of punchy, but I thought it was a terrific video, and I would love to just have the time to dissect and walk through all of these videos, but I just don't have that time right now. But I did want to, and then actually someone sent me a video from the Distributist, who very early on people said, oh, you should watch his videos. And I've watched some of his videos, and actually earlier this week I had a conversation with him, and I don't know if he might put that into a video and release it, the conversation that we had together. But then someone, without knowing that I'd had a conversation with him, sent me this video that he had done from a year ago, The Fatal Flaw of New Atheism. And the Distributist is Roman Catholic. He used to be a fan of the New Atheists, and now he's a Roman Catholic. And I didn't know anything about the Distributist, and he's always got little images of G.K. Chesterton, so I'm starting to figure out exactly where he's coming from. But last year he released a terrifically clear video that talked about why he left atheism and understanding what he calls the cult of confidence. He nicely early on deconstructs what I call the subtraction story. That's what Charles Taylor talks about it too, in terms of the God of the gaps and this imagination that suddenly with the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, God sort of gets displaced. And he nicely handles that story in that video and talks about the classic view of knowledge that, well, there were different domains of knowledge, different authorities and expertise. And so the scientist might deal with the question, what are facts? The artist might deal with the question, what is beauty? The religious person might deal with the question, what is meaning? The philosopher might deal with what is truth. Now he goes through a lot of material in a very short time, and obviously with any kind of summary like this, there's a lot that you could critique, but I think he's basically right here that it was respected that there were different domains of knowledge. And what happens with the scientific revolution, I think it's the age of confidence, that now suddenly with these powerful new tools, by taking out the subjectivity and trying to get at a least common denominator objectivity, an imagined objectivity, what I've called in previous videos the monarchical vision, now suddenly via facts we know the world. And what happens is that suddenly you have scientism, which says these are the domains of knowledge, and in a sense it's an overreach of what science can do. And this is where Nietzsche comes along and talks about the death of God, how God is, you no longer have these distinct authorities or even a unified hierarchy in which all of these aspects could in fact be arranged. You have one aspect that is now dominating everything, and that aspect was obviously incredibly powerful, and many of its products terribly impressive to us, yet lurking in the back of my mind as I watched his video, I was thinking a lot about Jordan Peterson's basic dichotomy early on in Maps of Meaning, a space for object and a forum for action. Because even with this perspective, and I'm not criticizing the video in this, I'm just saying with any treatment of almost anything, you have to reduce things. But there's the difficulty that we have is, well, action within the forum of consciousness and especially necessity obliges us to act almost always with limited information, and this obviously opens the door up for pragmatism. And essentially he notes that, and I think he notes, well, he doesn't really say it this way, but scientism has run its course. It really began to run out of fuel at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's lingered because these things take actually generations to work through. And where he looks at all these things, questions that are answered by science. What causes gravitation between bodies? Well, whether or not that question is answered, that's I think actually a question. Does the Earth revolve around the sun? But again, all of these things, Jonathan Peugeot in a tweet talked about, all of these things are themselves heuristics, because they all presume certain contexts in which they are true, and they are all perspectival in terms of, well, if you imagine yourself as almost none of us have, if you imagine yourself somehow out there in space looking, here's the moon, here's the Earth, here's the sun, there's all of this is so deeply embedded in so many different layers and contexts and perspectives that all of these systems are true within their domains, but the domain of science cannot encapsulate anywhere near the number of domains that we rely upon simply to live day in and day out. Now, I was listening to both of the interviews with Rebel Wisdom with Bret Weinstein are tremendous, and one of the things that Jonathan Peugeot talks about at the end of his video is he has a little bit of rant at the end of his video. He's frustrated with the likes of Owen Benjamin and Milo Yiannopoulos over their, do I dare say, childish? Their immature responses to Jordan Peterson, in terms of they just, as Jonathan Peugeot very rightly said, they built too much of their world on him, and now suddenly he's disappointed them. And pastors know this, because often people come into church and pastors then become tiny little minor celebrities, even in small churches, and people put them on pedestals. And if you're a pastor long enough, you realize when someone puts you on a pedestal, they're probably going to kick the pedestal out from under you. They needed to put you on a pedestal for their own reason, but none of us really deserve to be on pedestals. We all have feet of clay. We are all insufficient knowers. None of us are smart enough, and there's always someone smarter than you, someone who's read more than you, someone who knows more than you. So when I talk about, there are a couple comments with respect to my treatment of Gabor Mate, and I'm not meaning to attack any of these people. I'm trying to process their ideas, and I haven't read anywhere near enough Gabor Mate. And maybe you should say, well, I should have read more before I commented on him. Perhaps. I actually loved the interview, and I loved most of what he said, and I gave a little critique about some thoughts about some things I heard, and some of my critiques might be dead on wrong. And the same goes for Bret and Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris and all of them. I mean, these are incredibly intelligent, smart people who have done amazing work, and I respect them, and I respect the work that they do. But what I see is that this is part of the conversation. This is how we learn together. And whatever the IDW is, whatever their values are, I assume that part of the value is the vision of trying to speak honestly with one another, to challenge ideas. And there is on blogging heads, a couple of my favorite blogging heads, John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry, who I love, that they did a video which was, McWhorter was in a terrible context for doing a video. They shouldn't have even tried, but people were commenting about the previous video. One's mad at another. Many of us understand that, yes, there is drama. Okay, so Owen Benjamin and Milo Yiannopoulos have some drama about Jordan Peterson. Hopefully, we can have disagreements without it's kind of a cliche. Have disagreements without being disagreeable. That we can, for the sake of this shared project of gaining in knowledge and understanding, challenge each other's worldviews and try to kick the legs out from each other's arguments. Again, I read this biography of Joy Davidman, and I was rereading A Grief Observed. One of the things that Lewis loved about Joy Davidman is that she was smart, and she could, if he made a weak argument, she would be all over it. And Lewis loved it. And Lewis was a brilliant guy, and he loved winning debates. And it's always humiliating to be exposed or to lose a debate or to say something that's wrong or to say something that's stupidly wrong, and we all do it. But ideally, our better selves should welcome being exposed and being found wrong so that we can know what's right. And that's a noble, glorious vision of what YouTube videos and debates and all of this stuff should be about. Let's we've all got these fragile egos. Let's set them over here and let's try to be kind to persons, but let's deal with ideas with a lot of rigor and really attack them and work them over and test them and debate them. That's what we should be doing. So it's in that spirit that, again, I've learned so much from all of these individuals because like I've said before, I haven't had a biology class since 10th grade in Christian high school. And so my knowledge of biology is woeful. Now, it doesn't mean I haven't read books and listened to things, but I'm tremendously indebted to brilliant people like Richard Dawkins and Bret Weinstein. And as actually Adam from Think Club noted in one of the comments, Evergreen's loss was our gain, that unlike many academics, Bret is available to talk to Rebel Wisdom and to talk to others and to kind of be out there in this new forum for many of us who are lifelong learners to now have access to some of these intelligent, wonderful, generous people who are doing things. Having said that, well, let's get on with it, because I thought here in this little clip, Bret boils down what he's working at. But again, and I've dealt with this in other videos before, every time I hear it, I think, are you listening to other parts of yourself? Are you recognizing how you're using words? Every time you bring purpose into the conversation, not just in terms of a residual language residue that talk about things like genes having purposes, but again, if you listen to both of these Rebel Wisdom interviews, pay attention to how often Bret uses purpose and the way he uses it in the context. So this basically here is the heart of his observation about who we are. This is the heart of his anthropology and his mission. Give it a second to load.
To it. What I see is that we are a very odd species. We, like every species, have a mission that's pretty uninteresting. That mission is to pass on our genetic spellings to the exclusion of alternative genetic spellings.
Now, when he uses mission, there's purpose implied in that. Now, we're going to get into that a little bit. I don't want this to be a very long video because, again, I'm really crunched for time this month, but every time you hear him say mission, any of these purpose words, pay attention. And also, every time he says we, you have to ask, who is we?
To the extent possible. We also have the most amazing toolkit in nature for doing that. A toolkit that is capable of having conscious thoughts, and what's more, exchanging those conscious thoughts between individuals. We can set our values. We can say,
we can set our values. Who is we? And okay, we can set them. Can we really? Or are our values constructed? Have we simply inherited them and awoken with them around us and presumed they are ours? Do we have any stick with which to evaluate them? He seems unconscious of much of these challenges as he's using these words.
What would we like to accomplish? And what we would like to accomplish.
What would we like to accomplish? Where does liking things come from? Where does this desire come from? I mean, the selfish gene is a selfish meme.
is capable of being something other than gene spreading. So my feeling is once you recognize how dangerous and mind-numbing our evolutionary purpose is, you can't help but rebel against it. And
every time he talks like this, I just think, do you know what you're saying here?
if you rebel against it, then you have this marvelous machine that you can set to a more interesting, more noble, more meaningful purpose.
Interesting, noble, meaningful, purpose, you. I mean, all of these words are just crying out for definition. And it's all simply presumed.
And why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you?
To be an agent for a mindless program for spreading particular spellings to the exclusion of others. That's not an interesting game at all.
How do you know you're not that already? How do you know your entire program isn't exactly that? Because based on my understanding of the assumptions, that is exactly what you are, and you are in fact the best way to dupe the robot would be to have the robot imagine it is rebelling from its program and it is autonomous. That's what I understand to be the heart of the materialist argument, that our self is an illusion, and that our free will is a delusion, and all that we're doing is in fact running through our programming. And now we have someone who's an expert in this programming telling us exactly that. You know, I'm not a conspiracy person, but boy, if you believe that what we are doing is simply working at our programming, well then this guy is the king of that.
So my sense is we face one of the greatest puzzles that has ever been. Maybe it is the greatest puzzle that has.
Who is we?
Ever been, which is, can we reauthor our purpose? Now that we...
Can we reauthor our purpose? Okay. There is so much to this that just simply whoosh rushes on by.
Know how generic and dangerous our evolutionary purpose is. Can we take the machinery that was built for that purpose, the marvelous machinery set to that terrible purpose, can we repurpose it to something worthy of us?
Why was that purpose terrible? Why is it now seen as terrible? What new magical purpose can you employ it towards? I just hear Huxley and Brave New World behind all of this stuff. First of all, let's apply a little bit of C.S. Lewis language. Is there something outside the whole show? He talks as if there is, but I don't know that he's established any kind of metaphysical credentials for anything being outside the whole show. What is the we who have agency to change the code? We certainly feel this, but haven't we always felt this? And haven't we dismissed our ancestors imagining they too saw this? Oh, but now we know. But 50 years from now, won't people then do to us what we've done to the people 50 or 100 years ago? Where is your imagined neutral ground upon which you stand to evaluate and see all of these things? In atheist materialism, all there is the whole show, and there is no room for we or agency to break the programming. And in many ways, this is God out of the machine. Suddenly, boom, here we are. Now suddenly we see the world. We see what is good. We see what is right. What he should be saying is, we're assuming we see the world. We're assuming we know the right. We're assuming we know the good. What are we that we can evaluate the value of our code? We simply assume we share an agent, share an agenda, which I assume in his case is simply a materialist Epicurean vision of our contemporary culture, that, well, what is life for? Life is that individuals can have pleasant consciousness as long as possible, and that we can have certain amount of equality of this consciousness spread throughout the world at as large a scale as possible, and that is the good. Okay, but that doesn't stand up very quickly to almost anything, because as Peterson has showed us in many points, well, we very quickly exchange happiness for meaning. Okay, so let's have people have as much meaning as possible. But the entire frame of this thing is, again, we are creating our own meaning. And every time we are in a position that we imagine, we create our own meaning. There's a degree of arbitrariness to this. We get what we want. That's, in a sense, what our culture is built on. Well, aren't our wants also constructed? Why do we want different things from people of other cultures? Why do we see goods as being different from other cultures? There's this, so Bret is from more of the political left, as really am I in some ways, or at least both of us are, in a sense, refugees from the old left. That's probably a better way to put it. And we found ourselves in the new company of folks on the right wing who seemed far more open for debate and conversation. And so in that sense, Bret and I have a lot in common here. But the wholesale blindness to assumption, I just can't fathom from most of what he says. This is the tyranny of the moment. And okay, good for us now. Well, good for us for how long? The vision of the good in 2018 is different from the vision of the good in 1975, which is different from the vision of the good in 1935, which is different from the vision of the good in 1905. I mean, just in the span of a little over 100 years, we've had radical different visions of the good, and visions of the good where and when. Someone who's been living in Washington State, or is that different from someone who's been living in California? Is that different from someone who's been living in Kansas, or someone who's living in Arkansas, or someone who's living in Georgia, or a man versus a woman, or on and on and on and on and on? There's just, who are we to decide what is good? It presumes there is no real ought, only can. So now we're in Nietzsche territory. And so let us go on to reshape the world as we imagine it. And actually one of the best comments in the previous video from Rebel Wisdom from Surrock the Slayer, and I think he's seen some of my videos because I remember his name in my comment section. I was nodding my head until halfway the interview. I'm not a utopian. Says a bunch of utopian stuff, laugh out loud. It's exactly how I felt and how I often feel. Well, we can design the good. Well, this isn't any different from what we've been seeing, is it? We are footnoting our values with blind science. This is a recapitulation of the last 150, 200 years of thinking. This is just modernism in updated dress. So when I had my conversation with the Distributist, one of the things, and we got it, a lot of my new conversation partners are political conservatives who want to talk politics, and politics isn't generally really what I want to focus on, but they keep dragging me in. And I do read a lot of history, and I love history. And so one of my comments to him was that we're sort of back in the between the world wars period, where not only in Germany was there this, and in Europe there's this fierce tension between the far right and the far left. Well, this was going on in America, and part of what I enjoyed about the Joy Davidson biography was her life. Her life epitomized a lot of this. She grew up in a Jewish immigrant household, and her father, became an atheist, but was a demanding atheist, and they were all the way, but her father was, in a sense, an American, not a communist. She swung over to become a radical feminist and a radical communist, and they were going to reshape the world for the masses. But of course, they were nothing like the masses. And what they got bought off very quickly on was affluence and education and elitism and prosperity, all of which were semi-available in America, at least greater than it was in, let's say, the Weimar Republic, or in the slums or in the peasant hovels of pre-Soviet revolutionary Russia. But all the basic options were on the table then, and the polarization was probably darker and less informed than it is now. But all of those elements are there. And so, when I listen to Bret Weinstein, it's almost, he would never sanction eugenics, but what he's talking about has all the basic elements of eugenics. We can remake ourselves. We can remake the world. Well, who is we, and what is in fact a human being? And so he's essentially blind to what seem to be the religious, philosophical, ethical elements of this imagined project. And of course, it's all in the name of project and progress. But again, if you go back, I was actually just watching a documentary with my wife last night on the beginnings of World War II, and she was asking questions about, she didn't like studying history in college. Now she's starting to enjoy it. And well, why? Let's talk about the Spanish Civil War. What happened in that Spanish Civil War? And why did America's like Bill Gresham, Joy's future husband, why did he go to Spain and get PTSD and come back a wrecked man in many ways? Why did Americans flock to the Spanish Civil War and why did Stalin get involved, and why did Hitler get involved, and what was Franco about? I mean, all these elements have been at play. And if you read almost any literature prior to the Second World War, eugenicist ideas are all over it, which is why, of course, Huxley wrote Brave New World in the way that he did. And so we're back to the question, what is good? What is the good? And how can you know it? And so you look I loved how he did this, how the Distributist did this video. And, I love science. There's the new atheist in the middle, but he can only see so far. And then actually he ends the video with a really lovely illustration. It was a terrific video. You should definitely watch it. I'll put the link in the notes. But, Bret, you're a smart dude. You're talking to really smart people. Esther made a comment about the fact that the IDW doesn't really talk to many religious people. Well, Jonathan and I are out here in video land in our tiny little corners, and Rebel Wisdom is working on their Jungian men's stuff, and so some of us are sort of at the fringes. But this brings me back to one of my observations about the church. The church hasn't been prepared to figure out how to engage in this conversation with these communities very well. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do as a pastor, Jonathan as an icon carver. But because the basic questions are the same questions as before, and how I miss the voice of Dallas Willard, who probably, part of what's difficult about engaging in these conversations productively is that they are so difficult. I know there was a lot of, when William Lane Craig was talking to Jordan Peterson, there was a lot of excitement about that, but I really didn't have a lot of anticipation for that. And I, in a small way, have been trying to get Jordan Peterson and N.T. Wright to have a conversation. And I think that could be good, especially after the Gifford lectures by N.T. Wright. But part of the problem with all of these high status people is that hierarchies bind and blind. And it's taken me a year plus to continue to try to get my head not only around what Jordan Peterson is trying to teach, but the value and location of it. And I still consider myself a beginner. And what it has opened for me is all of the learning I have to do. So all of the Jungians who are watching my channel are like, Paul, you got to read more Jung. Paul, you got to read more Jung. Let me teach you more Jung. And some of the philosophy folks are like, you got to get up to speed on Aristotle, and you got to get up to speed on Nietzsche, and the Roman Catholics. You've got to get up to speed on Aquinas. And the Reformed, one of the things I'd really love to do is I'd really love to walk through Herman Bavinck's dogmatics. Now, my grandfather, when my grandmother whittled down his library to one tiny shelf in their little 2-room retirement apartment, the 4 volumes left to him were Abraham Kuyper and Herman Bavinck dogmatics, which he read in the Dutch. And my family, I just before this, I just recorded the rough draft for Sunday where I talk about Eric Weinstein's tweet where he talks about his great grandmother giving up Orthodox Judaism when her brother died and becoming an atheist, and the consequences of that. Well, my great grandfather and his deconversion from Judaism and his emigration to the United States and their entry into the conservative Christian Reformed Church in Western Michigan, and my grandfather and father and myself becoming ministers, but not having, me. I don't know any Frisian, and I don't know any Dutch. I'd love to learn Frisian. I'd love to learn Dutch. I'd love to do all these things, but at the same time, growing up in a black community and being a missionary in the Dominican Republic with Haitians, and now living in California, there's just simply not enough life to learn everything, and not enough time. And now, obviously, with the death of my sister, that impacting my schedule, and that bringing new observations and requirements, and being a family, having 5 children and a wife, and all these things that I have to deal with. So, and this again for me is why the vision of God's kingdom, and the vision of the resurrection, and the vision of the age to come is such a comforting and exciting vision. So, well, now this got sort of rambly, but anyway, to get back to where I started, I don't know if I had another. No, that was the last of the slides. To get back to where I started, I don't know how many videos I'm going to make next week. And then when I get back, I've got to do the whole catching up things at Living Stones again. And then we're in the middle of Christmas, so I never quite know how Christmas goes. I didn't schedule any interviews for the last weeks of December. Some of you have been asking how you can talk to me. I haven't made being a patron a requirement. And almost everyone who asks, there's a link that I have. Don't put it in the comment section. The queue already gets filled. But there's a link that I have to schedule a talk with me, and then, like Mary and my conversation with her, she knew the routine. I'll record the conversation. I'll share the conversation back with you, and you can decide what to do with it. And some people decide to share the conversation with the rest of the world, which I deeply appreciate, and I know some of you do too. Other people decide to keep the conversation private, which is absolutely okay. YouTube is a place where for people who have little to lose, and that's why a number of people are anonymous on YouTube, like the Distributist. And other people have their face on YouTube and their name, like I am. But lots of stuff on YouTube, and like I said, you probably won't hear from me for a little while again. I think I'll probably post this on Saturday, tomorrow. But be well, and for those of you who have written me emails and I haven't written you back, sorry. I get behind, and sometimes things get lost. So. And if you're really trying to get through to me, be persistent, because that tends to be effective. I just don't always have the time and energy to go through all the emails and answer everybody's questions. And I know it's discouraging for you to put in the time to write me an email. Right now I'm scheduling one Sacramento meetup in December That's going to be December 16 at Living Stones. That's kind of in the middle of the month and kind of in the middle of all of my obligations. So this is kind of a hodgepodge video. Hope it's helpful.